What's up guys, today I'm going to show you a real quick video on my experience with the Fat Shark Recon HD. This is an Avatar HD protocol version. It's very easy to get this confused because not too long ago we had the HD0 version, which I have right here. And I had these goggles for good maybe a year now, or I don't remember when I got these, but this wasn't out very long before they stopped making them. And I actually love these goggles a lot. I actually use them more than my Skyzone Ultra X, which is actually a really good goggle with the module on it. Yeah, the screens cannot compare. I actually pre-ordered the VRX for the Avatar system. Still waiting on that, but I couldn't wait any longer, so I just got impatient. This was in stock and I was like, oh, let me just try this and see what it's like, and I might even like it better because it actually is a lot nicer to just plug a goggles in and just go and fly instead of having to plug in two things and turn on the goggles and the whole mess that you have when you have a module in the front. So here I am. This is the first time I'm opening the box, and yeah, it was very exciting for me. So here we have the goggles, and here we have the power cable. This power cable is just very straightforward. Whatever you plug in here, it just goes straight through to the goggles. And here we have, this is a little piece for your nose. And here we have the quick start guide. This is very handy. This actually gives you very straightforward, very quick rundown of how to get the goggles up and running, how to bind. So have a look at this. Now guys, it's up to you if you want to bind these first or do the firmware update, but I decided to bind mine first, so I'll show you just how easy this is. It's as simple as locating the bind button, which is right here. So it's the same on any one of these Avatar systems. There's always a bind button. All you need to do is power up your goggles and you wait until you see the black screen inside. You're going to see the OSD on the side, and that's when it's waiting for a signal from your VTX. And all you're going to do, you're going to first plug in your drone, just like I'm doing here. You're going to wait until the light on the VTX flashes green, and then all you do, you just quickly tap the bind button right here once, and then you go on your goggles and you find something to stick into this hole. Don't use what I'm using here, but you can find anything that fits in that hole, and you press that button once and you'll hear a beep. There you go, you're bound. And what happens if your firmware is mismatched? It will give you a warning, which is what I have inside of the goggles here. So this is the part where you really want to now make sure everything is on the same firmware. Now firmware for this system is very important because they change firmwares so frequently. I've had this just for a few days, and already a beta firmware came out that made the picture look so much better. Yeah, this is why I've had so much faith in the Walksnail system, because I've been watching it from the very beginning when there was all this controversy, and now they're just like, they've fixed so many problems and they continue to innovate and change things. So I feel like this is a good system to watch out for. So updating the goggles is pretty straightforward. You take the SD card out of the goggles, you put it in your computer, and here we have a folder with the different files that you can find as of right now. This might change, but this is what I had here. You have Avatar GND, which is ground, and you have Sky, which is the VTX, which obviously goes in the drone. So we have one Sky version that works for all the different VTX that they have. Doesn't matter which version you have, but the ground is the goggles. The one that just says ground, that's for the Dominator goggles. The one that says mini ground, that's the one that we want for the Fat Shark system, and the SE ground is the VRX. So once you put the SD card in there, it's just as simple as holding down the bind button for a few seconds. You will hear a beep, it will reboot, and then it will immediately begin to install your update. If you hear this sound, then you have a problem. It should be a slow beeping, and you just leave it. Do not touch it. Let it do its thing. It takes a while. It will reboot, then it will just come back up to the screen with the OSD around the side waiting for a signal, and that's it. You're done. Updating your VTX is just a matter of plugging this in here, and you also have to make sure that you plug the battery in. This does not power up anything on the VTX, which really sucks, but it's really quick to transfer the files, so you shouldn't actually need a fan for this part. If you're transferring video files off of this, then yeah, I put a fan in it because it takes some time to transfer. But you just plug this in, shows up as a drive, you just swap over the file onto the drive, onto the root of the drive, then you plug it out. Once you have the file in the VTX, you plug in your drone, wait for the light to go green. Doesn't have to be connected to the goggles, it will flash because there's no goggles. You're going to hold down the bind button for about 8 seconds. This light will turn off. It will come back red. Now, this is very important. When the light comes back red, just pay attention. If it stays solid red, there's a problem. It has to flash a few times red, and then it will stay solid. If it stays solid red, there's a problem with your firmware update. It didn't work. I learned that the hard way. So once you turn it, once the red light comes on after it reboots, it should flash a few times. Very important. Okay, so this is where I talk about how I felt flying the system for the first time. Guys, I was going into this knowing that there was going to be some feeling of latency because that's just the nature of this type of system. You are going to have more latency than HD0 or analog. And I know that these goggles, for example, they only do 60 frames per second. There is a lower latency mode when you go up to like 100 frames or 120 frames per second. These goggles do not do that. That's the one downside of these goggles. And yeah, I could feel it. I was crashing a whole lot when I started flying this. And at first, if you're not flying close to anything, you don't feel anything. It feels amazing. You can see the image is just, it's really, really amazing. Like compared to HD0, I'd say this is like 10 to 15% clearer just on 720p, which is the same that HD0 is. So yeah, it's really cool to fly and not see any breakup. However, if you do flip this into 50 megabits mode, then you do lower the latency a bit, and I did feel a little bit more connected to my drone when I did that. I usually fly mostly cinematic type of flying. That's what I've been doing for work. That's what you see me doing here. I'm not really doing any tricks or anything. I mean, also because I just got this drone and this system and I'm trying to really not crash it. When I put the HDMI out to my Sky Zones, it looked amazing in those OLED screens. That was really, really amazing, which makes me think now, is it better to get this goggle or is it better to get the VRX? And I feel that it actually would be better to get the VRX because if you are just starting, you want to try this out, and you have a pair of goggles, analog goggles that have HDMI input, it is actually better to get the VRX. I really feel like that's the way to go. Yeah, these goggles are just more convenient. So guys, keep in mind, I'm coming from HD0 and analog, and I also fly Express LRS on its lowest setting, lowest latency. So I'm used to having a very fast reaction time. So my feeling on this was very different. If you are flying DJI for a while, or you're already used to latency, or if you even flew a drone that had like a one of those Runcam split cameras that had latency, your brain adjusts for that. So you would feel like that's totally acceptable. In fact, if you take somebody who's been flying with a lot of latency and then give them something that has no latency, they're going to crash because their brain isn't used to the quick response time. It takes time to get used to these things, so just keep that in mind. So looking around the goggles, there isn't anything too special about these goggles except for the fact that we have HDMI out with this Type-C connector here. This does not power the goggles, at least from what I've tried. I tried plugging it in and the screen just flashed, so it's not made to take power in there. You power them here, which by the way, I used a 2S battery here that I just strapped on with some cloth tape. It's very light, and so far I have had this on for quite a long time. I have quite a few flights on this, and I haven't seen the battery go down low yet, and it seems to be very efficient in its battery usage. It seems to be at least better than the HD0 version in terms of power draw. But it's here we have a fan. I guess this is to cool the electronics, and this one is for defogging, I imagine so. But there are two fans, that's for sure. They're not too loud. It's about the same loudness as the HD0 ones, and that's the one thing that looks different. It just has this little thing on top, which is weird. There are no antennas, which is very strange. There are actually 4 patch antennas that live inside of here. They all point out that way. Joshua Bardwell showed this against the Dominator HD with some good antennas, and it didn't seem to make that much of a difference that they don't have antennas here. If you want, you can actually pull these off or drill them out, get the SMA connectors, and you can actually get the UFL, plug them into these wherever the patches are plugged into, and you can have external antennas if you want. The other thing I noticed about these goggles, which is the very same problem I had with the HD0 one, is that if you are looking at a black screen with just menu items on it, there's a lot of light that bounces around. Because it is using a mirror system in there, you can see the light kind of reflecting around, and it looks very confusing when there's just a black screen and just like one white object, for example. But when you're flying and there's a full image, you don't see any of that. It's very weird how that works, but it really isn't a problem once you're flying. You don't see any kind of reflections at all, and that's great. And the one thing I like to say is that I was able to at least change the brightness on the screen here. And on the HD0 version, there was nothing to change on the screen. You couldn't change contrast, brightness, or colors or anything. Here you can only, at least now, you can change the brightness. One thing you'll find is that these goggles do take a while to boot. Now, this is true of most digital systems now, especially the more advanced ones. So I do suggest that when you're going out to fly, you will plug this in first. And this is true of also the VRX and the Dominator HD goggles, the really high-end ones. They do take a while. And the new HD Zero goggles also have a long boot time. That's because they're running a Linux operating system, I guess, inside. It has to boot like a regular computer, so it does take a while. So yeah, that's one downside of having digital goggles. So I just realized here it shows you the distance, which means that this system is actually doing some quantum computation of the signal between the goggles and the drone to tell you how far you are, and it actually seems to be quite accurate, which is cool. So this means if you don't have a GPS and you're flying out and you're trying to find your way back, you could use that as a metric to see if you're actually coming back to yourself or going further away, which is actually quite cool. So just to summarize, these goggles being an entry-level pair of goggles into the Walksnail system, I think these are pretty good. I think they do the job. They're acceptable for what they are, and if you don't have a pair of analog goggles that have HDMI in, I think this is what you need to get. If you do have a pair of goggles, I would suggest that the VRX might be a better option for you. It's pretty much the same hardware inside there anyway. So guys, I will be revisiting this topic of Walksnail. I'm definitely going to be holding on to my HD Zero gear. I still find that there's a place for that. So there is no need to say that one is better than the other. I think everything has its place. There's no need to compare these two. And I think it's great that we have these options right now. So until next time, guys, happy flying.